Welcome to the Dad Bod, a podcast that tells the story of what it means to be a dad today, one dad at a time. My name is Sean, and I'm a dad living in New York City with my wife and our two young native New Yorkers. The formula for the Dad Bod is simple. Each episode, we're going to interview one dad to get his story of being a dad. Over time, all of these stories will start to create the bigger story of what it means to be a dad today. If you like what we're doing with the Dad Bod, subscribe, post up a 5-star review, and most of all, share it, because these meaningful conversations are a great way to start a meaningful conversation of your own with someone that you care about. So what I'm about to play for you is bonus material from my conversation with Mitch, Generational Wisdom of Dad. After listening to this episode, I definitely recommend that you give that original conversation a listen as well. As I mentioned in that episode, talking with Mitch was like getting a chance to look at my life from a healthy, helpful distance by being airlifted to Mitch's higher perch in life as a dad of 2 dads, a grandfather of 6, and a husband of 45 years. This episode is from a second conversation I had with Mitch, where he identified and shared his perspective on the major moments of transition in a child's life that we as dads should be particularly mindful of. Yes, for the benefit of our children, but just as much for our benefit as well. Because as he points out, these are moments of transition for us too. All right, enough talking now. I'm very pleased to be sharing additional grandfatherly perspective from Mitch, Generational Wisdom of Dad. Test. Hey, Mitch. Looks like your end is on mute.
How about now?
Yes. All right.
I was just saying that it's my wife's most fervent hope that I would be on mute. Not so much for this call, but
That's one thing I've gotten better at, is just shutting up sometimes.
yeah,
It's helpful.
Well, it's something that may or may not come up in this last tranche of our conversation about restraint, which I think is an extremely underestimated skill, particularly in New York, where it's like could be seen as a sign of weakness. Like, what's the matter? You have nothing to say. But sometimes when you listen, you say a lot, particularly from a granddad perspective. Since being a native New Yorker, I already know everything,
Right.
quote unquote. But I really know about parenting because I've already done it. So, don't do that, do this. Nobody plays that sport anymore, whatever. You have all the answers. But one thing you learn is that you didn't have any questions posed to you with all your answers. So maybe, as one of my bosses said when I took over the company that he founded called Wonderman Worldwide, Lester Wonderman said to me before a really, really key meeting, he said, "This is not going to be so simple to do, but listen and heed my words. Just because you're in the mode to sell, don't assume that the customer or the client is in the mode to buy." That's a really important lesson in sales, but I think it's also an important lesson in life as well.
I love that. And you touched upon restraint when we were towards the end of our part 1 conversation. And I've already been thinking about that a lot. I thought the advice, everything you had to say, but I thought in particular the advice on marriage that you had, especially as it pertains to restraint, and I will be thinking about a lot more to kind of crystallize that line of thinking for myself, but I thought it was really great. And so as we acknowledge that you are the first granddad on the Dad Bod, and to get this wisdom from you as far as what it means to be a good dad, you sent me a list that was titled "Good Dad Definition?"
Right.
So I think that there's probably some built-in open-mindedness that is being invited to this list. But in any event, I did want to get into this a little bit. It's a list 25 items long
Really?
But maybe just take me through it however you see fit.
Sure. Thanks for asking because there's a lot of value in having made so many mistakes along the way. The question is, what do you do about the mistakes that you make? Do you cover them up? Do you step back, reflect, and get a true lesson learned? To the extent that you can get better than 50% on the lessons learned, that's pretty good. I will say that there is some similarity between baseball and parenting, and particularly being a dad. And that is, it's good to hit better than 300, but don't be thinking that you're going to be hitting 600, 700, 800.
Right.
No one's ever done it in the history of baseball. And I suspect no one's ever done it in the history of parenting either. So the question is, where are the stakes higher? They generally are high when you look back in key transitional moments. And some of those transitional moments are truly like sort of universal. And some, like buying your son's first baseball glove could be a huge moment, at least for the dad. But for other people, they say, well, first ballet slippers or first whatever it might be. So when I think about transitions, I have to think about it through a personal lens because I only know what I know. And I'm very aware that I don't know what I don't know. So with that, the first transition for a new dad is sort of the miracle of birth. For me, the nerves when asked by the obstetrician to cut the umbilical cord, that was like a panic attack for me because you know you don't want to get something like that wrong. I knew I
Right.
didn't want to go into medicine because already I was feeling a little queasy. But I remember just saying, "How's here?" And he said, "Fine." And then I moved it 2 inches, and he said, "Fine." And I moved it down and he said, "Cut the cord." That type of
You're
uh,
gonna move 2 inches at a time all the way out the room.
right. I think that's the not the first partnership that you have with your partner, but it's among the first, and it's such a tangible event. Other transitions that are meaningful for pretty much everyone. That first time when you separate, your baby being held by another human being who's not biologically related. You think they're doing vetting now in Congress, like who is this person and how hygienic are they and what references do they have? And, meanwhile, it's like your next door neighbor that you've known for 35 years. Uh, but but you can't help yourself. And I think this is all part of that laughing at yourself. That's really, really important. But for you at the time, it's so memorable. You know that something gets deeply seared somewhere in your brain when you remember it so vividly, even though at the time you may not have thought that it was such a big deal. And you
Right.
realize like your hands perspired, or you feel like a little faint or something like that. These are really important clues that this was an important moment for you. And at the end of the day, it's those moments that we cherish. For Sandy and I, she had set up a play date. Doesn't seem like a big deal, but wow, my kid is going to be interacting with another kid. Of course, these early ones that as time goes by, they become less relevant, but they're particularly memorable because of our feeling that we're not in control. So you sort of remember those moments and you learn about what you could or should have been looking for only after the fact.
So I wanted to ask you that. When did you realize that, for example, that first play date was a significant moment that belonged on a list of significant moments like this? Did you realize it in the moment, a year
Yeah,
later, or did you realize it 2 weeks ago when we first started talking about
right.
this?
I think closer to 2 weeks ago when you're actually looking back at those moments because there's so much emotion, particularly with your first child, that everything sort of gets overwhelmed each day. But when you try to think back and reflect on what was significant for the child, for my child, that's really significant. That's the beginning of a never-ending socialization process.
Mhm.
When you hear it that way, that sounds like the most fundamental, most important thing you can
Right,
possibly
right.
do for
No,
your
that's a good
child.
point. That's a good
And
point.
yeah, and meanwhile, it was just happened to be someone who was, if you have a playroom in your building or in the park, or the kid sneezes on your kid or vice versa, and a relationship has begun. But I didn't really view it until I looked myself in the mirror and said, so what are Sean and I really talking about here? We're talking
Yeah,
about life
yeah.
and someone else's life that's really important to you.
I'm very curious to know your thoughts on the next one, being potty trained.
Yeah, being potty trained is uh, maybe the most stressful moment. Like everyone says, oh, my kid was toilet trained at two and a quarter. And I say to myself, okay, I'm about a year and a half behind you because this is the beginning of bragging about your kid
Yeah, yeah.
in a way that doesn't appear to be bragging. We just have to
Right.
watch out for things like that in New York, right?
I'm guilty. I'm
And
guilty.
yeah, well, I mean, we're all guilty. And that's what makes it funny
Yeah,
because we're
that's
all
true.
literally guilty. We're guilty at the time, and we still do these things.
Yeah.
So that's what really makes us human, those kinds of imperfections. But one of my heroes, Sigmund Freud, says failure to navigate what he termed the anal stage is really not a good thing because it leads to either incredible messiness on the one hand or anal retentive sort of OCD type behavior on the other. That seems like
Mm.
a really bad.
Set of choices. Yeah.
Is there like a C, none of the above? But there, I mean, but you sort of notice in your kids, and then this happens, which is you notice about yourself something. Like if you're the kind of person who would scream if someone walked into your apartment or house with their shoes on, and within 27 seconds of when guests leave, the apartment is like totally spick and span. It's like,
Right. Right.
okay. Well, you might have thought about how you potty trained the child. And I'm a big believer in Freud, even though so much of it's been dispelled. And the reason I'm a big believer and guided by so much of what he wrote is because he observed the human condition.
Mm.
He didn't have an MRI. There's no neuroscience. So it was just, he was bombarded with people, different
Yeah.
kinds of people, and he sorted it out and he
Hmm.
categorized them in certain ways, in ways that made sense for the next 60, 70 years. Now, as I say, a lot of it's been dispelled, but when something comes out of empirical, your observations, it's kind of hard to dispel. So when I taught in high school, the elective class, I spent a week on Freudian psychology because it's so interesting to me. I would always ask, how many of you have younger siblings? Does anyone remember them being, because now I'm talking to older teenagers, them being potty trained? Oh, yeah, that was crazy. And kids would describe things like, a lot of people in a lot of cultures, they have intergenerational families together, if not living in the same unit close by. And so everyone's participating in this, like the bathroom door. Just imagine this scene. This bathroom door is open. The kid is sitting on the pseudo pot, not even the real potty, right? It's like the fake plastic one. And they're going, come on, let's go, come on.
Yeah.
You know, like someone's on the foul line for the Knicks in the NBA
Yeah.
championship. Come on, you can do it. You can do it. And so what happens to this kid? They either perform or they don't.
Right. Right.
Just like Jalen Brunson, he performs or he doesn't.
Yeah.
He gets over it a lot faster, trust
He
me,
does.
than that poor whatever year old. And think about how stressful that is for the child.
Right.
because what do
Yeah,
they want to do? They want to please everyone.
totally. Yeah.
I mean, and one thing that children develop early in life is a BS detector.
Mm.
I mean, they can really detect the BS. So if you think that you've done a good job of patting your kid on the head, say, so that's okay.
Hmm.
Or don't worry about it. Meanwhile, the kid can read you like a book.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I mean,
Hmm.
they're you. Why do you
Hmm.
think that they don't know you?
Right.
So that one in particular, that performance, seems like it's one that's very pivotal.
It is
And
one of the
it's
first
funny.
performances. Yeah.
Yeah. And it is a performance. And you don't need a curtain. I mean, in fact, you need to shut the door,
Should be a curtain.
and then you learn later when you ask the question, this sort of the most among the most obvious questions you should be asking, which is, do you want privacy or some version of that? And they say yes. So, oh, this is one of those, uh, that emoji where you're slapping yourself in the forehead. And I can say that our kids, my two boys, kind of messy. I kind of figured that we didn't do a great job. But,
Should
you
I
know,
cut this from the? This might need to
no,
be. No, do they
no,
know this? They know this already.
yeah, I mean, their handwriting,
And then the next few on the list are first day of music class or preschool or kindergarten.
right.
Those feel rightfully grouped together. Tell me about
Yeah,
those.
I think it's a cluster, but the notion that there's going to be on a regular basis, you will be depositing the child into the hands of someone whom they, at least initially, don't know, doing something that you don't know much about generally, or are hardly expert on. And that separation is clearly it's a challenge for the child. I mean, I see it in my grandchildren. They, for inexplicable reasons, they just run and don't let whoever's dropping them, they don't let them leave. And that could be after 2 months of perfect separation. So, the kids are complex because they're human beings. And I think that one of the reasons that that separation is a challenge is because, again, the kids really good at reading mommy and daddy, caregivers, really good at it. And we believe that we are being judged on how well the separation takes place.
Oh, yes.
So while I have this albatross around my ankle, who's I'm sort of dragging across the floor, because he or she won't let me leave, I feel all these eyes on me, like a real tisk tisk tisk,
Yeah. Yep.
well, I guess you were watching a lot of television
Right.
because you missed this one. And of course, when you step back just a little bit farther, you realize no one is thinking about you. Not one. They are only thinking about themselves and their situation.
Yeah.
But part of what compounds it is you think that you're in the eye of everyone's camera.
This is one that it lurks. You think it's about your kid, but actually all your behavior is about you. And I think that also kind of rings through on the next three items, as well as sort of the fourth item afterwards. So we've got first parent teacher conference, first soccer, baseball, etc., practice or game, first music, dance, art class. These things are all things where the yes, it's them participating, but you have a feeling of being judged, or at
Right.
least judging yourself. So tell me about
Right.
those.
Yeah. That's if you ever monitored the small talk among the parents when they collectively they're watching their kids, it's it's kind of embarrassing. It's this. I guess I might call it the pretending not to care attitude
Yes,
when you're
guilty.
when you're obsessed, and so you're really a bad actor. Of course, everyone is doing it, so we're all sort of increasing our bandwidth for each other, but we're all pretty bad at it. I don't really know anyone who really doesn't care. And I have to say, because I taught middle school and high school, that I thought a lot more about the parent teacher conference, my own for my children, going through that process, because here is an expert, at least in their field, who knows more about your child in the school context than you could ever possibly know,
Right.
giving you feedback about your child. And of course, you know the script by now. You're not hearing feedback about your child, you're hearing it about yourself.
Right.
Particularly in the early years, like if Johnny can't sit still, that's you bozo. That's not Johnny. But how you respond to that feedback, which is really gold in so many ways, unless you have a teacher who doesn't care. And teachers are maligned all the time. I don't really know teachers who don't care. It's just not the kind of work that you can pull off for 40 years not caring. You just
Yeah.
can't do it. You can't do it day in and day out. But how do we listen? There are multiple ways to listen when someone is giving feedback, particularly about your child or even you in a work environment. Do you feel the need to explain, to defend, to disagree? And in which case the teachers know, because we as teachers, we always prep, and the principal preps us in terms of the time management. Because when a parent goes into explaining or defensive mode, that 5 minute time allotment can become 50,
Yeah.
right? Because that parent's not leaving.
Right. Right.
That kind
Until
of
they've
parent's not leaving.
explained.
So
Yeah.
you generally you have like a panic, literally have a panic button, but you have and an administrator would come by and say, why don't we, continue the conversation in my office? Let me take it away because there are 12 parents waiting for, Mr. So-and-so. But I think that to the extent that you ever found yourself or find yourself feeling the need to provide explanation or to defend or actually say, I completely disagree. That's not what so and so said. And because it's someone who may, in fact, really have an emotional connection, positive for your child, this is the freest gold that you'll ever get. And oftentimes, I think we're guilty of not listening to it or say, that teacher, he's got it out for my daughter. He's got it out for, as opposed to let's parse what is said, because it shows that you're understanding that the teacher
Mm.
is teaching. This is not a one-on-one tutor. This is someone who's teaching 20 other kids or 23 others. If it's a 24, 16, whatever the number is. So if you find yourself saying, I really hear you and I want to talk to Johnny about this, you're really sending such an important signal to the teacher
Mm.
that you are on her team. You are on her support team as opposed to she's on your support team. And that's so fundamentally positive for the child's learning. I can't stress it enough. If the teacher feels that the parent is trying to act in a way that maximizes the kid's performance, but also optimizes the class performance
Yeah.
at the same
Mm.
time, your son or daughter is going to have some extra attention.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Just because we can't help ourselves.
I mean,
Because
it's an important kind of lobbying moment in a
it,
way.
it is. If you look at it as the teacher, almost as a client of yours, then you will view that. How can I make that teacher successful? Because if the teacher is successful, my child is going to be more successful,
Right.
as opposed
Absolutely.
to
Yeah.
trying to go straight for the jugular and say, I don't really care about these other kids. You get that kind of unintended tension, and the teacher's a human being. Just
Right.
think
Yeah.
about it. You're trying to help, and if you help, you're motivating that teacher to help you. The important transition, it happens at a couple of different ages, depending on circumstance, is when you cease to be the most important influence in your child's life. That could happen at the age of 3, like for minutes at a time. Like, I want to continue to play with Dorothy. It's so fundamentally important. You're supposed to be thrilled when it happens. And
Right.
yet I don't know too many parents who are thrilled that
Right.
they go from primary to secondary. That's slow, but from secondary to tertiary, like
Yeah.
super fast.
Yeah.
Now social media just is an accelerant
Mm-hmm.
on that, and one that, once the genie's out of the bottle, is really, really tough.
Yeah.
So, but I do think recognize that you go from being like you're always the final decider, but that can get ugly and not productive. You really want to simulate being the primary influencer, even when you're not.
Mm. Hmm.
Uh,
What does that mean
because,
exactly?
if you're just before the teenage years, so 9, 10, 11, and when his or her major reference point is their peers, it's almost unavoidable. And all these new question marks that seem to have higher stakes because they do, like their choice of friends, like more fundamental friends as opposed to the ones that you connect them with because you're friendly with their parents or you like their parents or you want their parents to like your kid, all of these complex things. But the fundamental initiative is taken by the parent. Now, when it's taken by the kid, and all of a sudden you hear from a teacher that, you know, Betty and Susan, I've had to separate them, and I wonder if you could help there because generally speaking, the more you try and separate kids, the more it becomes like a magnetic
Right.
attraction, right? Again, because of where the influence is coming from. So this is where in fatherhood, and I would say this for grandfatherhood, the analogy I would use is you got to be the best sixth man on that basketball team that you could possibly be. So
Mm.
because that sixth man doesn't start, may want to start, may want to play, may want to be totally
Yeah.
involved, totally
Yeah.
engaged at all times, but their real job from a team perspective, so let's say from the family perspective, that's the team, is to be 100% available 24/7 with a whatever it takes attitude.
Yeah.
Now there's some six men, women in basketball, the sixth player who is asked to score like 20 points, and
Right.
others are asked not to shoot at all,
Right.
but to play defense or just worry about assists or get in this guy's or this woman's face to throw off their game. And so it's selfless. I mean, there are awards and things like that, but your agent is always telling you, you'd be making
You
tens,
could be a starter. You could do more.
yeah, and you'd be making tens of millions of dollars if you were scoring 20 points a game as opposed to, whatever the case might. I don't feel sorry for too many professional basketball players, but the emotional sense is the same.
Yeah.
I want to play. I know I could do better. I know I could do better. I see things. If I was in there and you've got to, this is where restraint and backing off and
Mm.
waiting.
Mm.
And you notice that the best six players on basketball teams, even though the court is, they're only running like 15 feet, but they sprint out there. They're going with the energy. They got their hands up.
Yeah.
They're definitely saying something to the player that they're to be guarding, and they're setting a tone and they inject an energy. And then the coach, in this case, your son or daughter, right, is saying, I'm going to be using him more often. This
Uh-huh.
guy
Yeah.
provides something that I
Yeah.
can't.
Right.
You want to be additive at all times. You don't want to be
Yeah.
redundant or competitive.
Right. Right.
And it's a fine line. If you see where I'm going with that,
Yeah, no, and like you said, it matches everything that I've received as a preview from my friends who have kids that are a little bit older, who have their parents have moved to a place of being secondary to tertiary. It
right,
happens fast, and how do you, in a way, like the sixth man, maybe it's an aging star. How do you stay relevant?
right,
Like, yeah, you did all those things. You had those glory days in your career, but now now it's time to be the best six man you can be and staying ready at all times and
Yeah.
filling all the gaps.
And it's a tough role to play, particularly if you play highly competitive sports in college and or in the pros. Those players, since the age of 3, have been so much better than everyone at all
Right.
times.
Right.
I mean, even if they have the flu, they're still scoring 25 points in the game.
Right.
So it's really tough. They are the pitcher and the shortstop. They are the center on the basketball team and the point guard, and because they
Hmm.
get all the rebound. And then now they're being told, this is the role I want you to play. And I think it's really important for dads to understand that that's unspoken from their child. The child
Yeah.
doesn't sit you down. I mean,
Right.
I've never heard of an 11-year-old say, Dad, sit down. We got to talk. I mean, that would be a mirror. I would love to watch that. It would be kind of hilarious as a sitcom, but it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
It doesn't happen. But they are saying that. You just have to read the body language. We communicate so much beyond the vocal cords,
Yeah.
and particularly kids.
Yeah.
They know from the shoulder shrug. They know if you want to hug and they don't want to. It's complicated. Life is very complicated. Growing up in an urban area is even more complicated. And when that urban area is New York, it's just everything is compounding.
Yeah.
And a big part of that is because we perceive the stakes to be so high. And you only realize in retrospect, in hindsight, stakes really weren't that high. If you had chosen to pass that ball on the fourth grade team, maybe the team would have won. But as the years go by, you say, I can't believe my son didn't talk to me for 3 weeks
Yeah.
because I screamed out from the
Mm.
stands, pass the ball, or whatever it is I did. And that there's actual danger in being one of those kinds of parents, now, because like everything else, everything seems to be magnified. But when you look at it fundamentally, you really have to be careful about not letting your child grow up.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and again, this is perfect 2020 hindsight. Like,
Right. Right.
so again, you're not trying to bat 1,000, but if
Yeah.
you get that right half the time, your child has a huge advantage versus other children because
Yeah.
parents don't get it right even half the time
Yeah.
when it comes to that. You don't take the SAT exam. I'm taking it. Wait a second.
Right.
You're not taking it. No, I'm taking it because someone's going to ask me what score you got. Oh my,
Yeah.
this is potty training all over again, isn't it? You
You have
know,
you have teenage kids, and you're
yeah,
basically still staring at them while they're
yeah.
sitting on the toilet.
It's just the scene changes, but the stress level
Yeah.
remains the same. And as kids get older and can do something about that, like
Yeah.
ignore, reject, then you realize that you're losing just at the time when they need you most, you might be losing that control for the wrong reasons.
And so this letting them grow up and the theme of restraint that you've touched upon, it definitely brings me a little bit to this ultimate item on your list, number 25, the courage to permit them to fail. What's
Yeah,
that all about?
right. It's I'll just pick on an example that I hear all the time, particularly when I was working with children in the Bronx, because their parents would say things like they have to become a doctor or an engineer because I know those are good jobs, and nothing really about the kid and their interests or anything else. But think about yourself, Sean. I mean, you may or may not, because we don't know each other too well. But if your kids come home and say they want to be a studio art major, I picked that because I saw recently that that was the lowest paying job 10 years after college. That was the lowest paying profession. And then I asked myself, I said, why did you start with that? And why didn't you ask whether it was the most meaningful profession
Yeah.
or the one that someone could fall in love with and imagine themselves doing until the day they pass? Because I grew up in New York, so I didn't do that. If you are seen to judge, if your child perceives you to be a judge, they will reject you. Because, dirty little secret, nobody likes to be judged.
Yeah. Yeah.
We hate to be judged.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons why friendships go away, because that's so fundamental, versus, I guess, the opposite, pretty much 180 degrees, which is acceptance
Yeah.
for who you are as opposed to who I am.
So what's your advice on how to do that, which is to not judge them, but also not trip their BS meter either and give them false affirmation
Right.
to be an honest and reliable person in their life, which means, that sometimes you're the messenger of something that might be hard to hear. How do you balance all these things?
Yeah. Well, I think all through this time, it's really important to reflect on whether or not you're modeling the behavior that you hope to see and receive in them, because you don't really have a right to expect someone to behave in way X when you've been modeling Y and Z your entire life. So little things like I definitely had a tendency to watch too much television because I wanted to watch it. All
Hmm.
right, but that's a consequence that I have to recognize in
Yeah.
myself. And I use a silly example, but when you think about the more consequential kinds of decisions, like choosing permanent friends, choosing a life partner, to the less consequential, like deciding to go to college, choosing a major, choosing a career, you don't have to add any stress to your child's life.
Mm.
They're
Hmm.
already there.
Yeah.
So I really think that to the best degree possible, again, you want to think of that sixth man. You want to be immediately available to listen, period. Because at the end of the day, even parents who don't have as much success, they're still trusted more than any outside member of the family. I don't know if it's the ultimate point about transitions and the important role they play in the development of your children, but it's a funny thing that's happening while your children are growing up. Guess what? So are you.
Mm.
So maybe you were 20 something or 30 something or 40 or
Right.
whatever it is. You're going to be going through significant amounts of physical, emotional, biological transitions yourself. And this is where it's really important. It sounds a little counterintuitive on the surface. Sometimes you have to be a little selfish because you need time for your transitions too. On an airplane, put your oxygen mask
Mm.
on first. The whole notion of how important it is to recognize that you yourself are still a living, vibrant, growing, evolving human being is really important for your children.
Yeah.
So sometimes parents say, well, I don't really have time for that. You know,
Yeah.
well, all of a sudden we wake up with these backaches or,
Yeah.
just different things
Right.
that
Right.
happen, that to the extent that we don't take care of them, we're actually doing a disservice to our children. And that's what I would always say to a parent who feels guilty about like caring about themselves.
Right.
I said, well, you have to look at it's another way of caring about your child
Yeah, no,
because your
absolutely.
child needs you to be as healthy as you can be, as
That's
strong
right.
as you can, as emotionally strong as you can, and all of these things because they need that. This is the model that they remember forever. They say you don't really remember much of before the age of, depending on the psychologist. They definitely nothing before 3. Sometimes it's up to 7 that you don't remember like vivid. But whatever it is, they definitely when they're like young adults and older, they remember
Yeah,
everything.
right.
And they will also see something that not to add morbidity to the conversation, but they will see, if you're lucky enough to have your parents
Yeah.
or older generation, how that relationship is, because there there may be books for that, but no one reads them.
Yeah.
People don't read
Yeah.
them. It's all experiential,
That's
right?
true. No, you will imitate and emulate what was modeled to you by your parents. And as I look at this list of key transitions in your kids' lives, I guess the takeaway is that for every single one of these, it's to recognize it's a key transition in your life as well, as a
Right.
parent and as a person.
If we can remember you could call it the original sin of parenting, of fathering, of living your aspirations through your children.
Yeah.
This is the one that New York parents bat about like 135 on, which means they get cut from the team. Uh, you can't sustain that batting average for very long before you get booed. Again, the detectors that children have about their parents, they can smell disappointment
Yeah.
across the globe. They can see it, they can smell all 5 senses.
Yeah.
Like the hug, so even the
Yeah.
touch. Again, no one bats very high on this, but to the extent that you can get closer to 300, get it
Yeah.
right 3 out of 10 times, because it's so difficult. And it starts maybe with that parent teacher conference.
No, I guess to put a fine point on the BS detection that your kids will do on you, what you really don't want them to detect from you in terms of BS is that you mean it when you say you love them. You
Right,
want them to know that that's real, that's genuine.
right.
Even if you're not perfect at it, just
Right.
batting 300, you want them to know that when I say I love you, I really mean it.
Yeah. It's really, really important. I'm glad you said that. It's funny when my father turned 100, so he didn't know, or no one knew that he had 15 more months
Yeah.
left on the planet, 16 more months left on the planet. But he said, I remember him saying, because he knows I'm like, I get queasy over these things. He said, every time we talk, I'm going to end by saying, I love you. And, uh, and he did. And it made me feel like a little awkward. And then he would pause, that pregnant pause, which is like just waiting for a few words,
Come on.
right
Come
back
on,
at
you
you
could
kind
do
of
it.
thing. And he wouldn't allow things like, yeah, me too, or right
You're
back
like,
at you.
me too what? Me too.
Right, exactly. He's a clever man. The best metaphor that I found is I was always intrigued when I drove. My college was about 250 miles away. I'd always get gas at the gas station before the college town, which had no gas stations. In that Gulf station, at the cash register, there was a plastic soap dish with a hand scrawled sign. It was always messy, like oily from pumping gas, and it said, "Take a penny, leave a penny." And we see those things in diners all the time and various places. I realized that despite all the years of education, everything that I had, that was my life philosophy. That I spent the first half of my professional life taking as many pennies as I could because that was the game. How many pennies you got? Is that sort of that world that I was prepared for, trained for, went to school for? And this hits everyone. The question is what you do about it, what you decide to do about it, because it hits everyone. The notion of resume burnishing versus legacy.
Mhm.
And your resume becomes less and less important as you get older, because I don't know the last time someone asked for my resume, but it was a long time ago. But the real resume, your curriculum vitae, that's what is the story of your life.
Mhm.
Depositing some of those pennies back is a really important way to reach closure on the kind of life that you feel that you want to have and be known for, and most importantly, model for your children. That can mean money, but I would say the most important element of leaving pennies is your time. Now you're in your early 40s, so you're now at that stage where you realize you heard it your whole life, but how precious time is.
Yeah.
And when you sacrifice that time to be doing something and not doing something else, that sends such an important message to every stakeholder who's important to you, starting with yourself. One of the most important building blocks in fatherhood is modeling behavior. It's not just modeling the behavior while your children see you 24/7 in that household, but God willing, your life is long, and so they see you in all these different contexts intermittently, and so they see you more kind of the way the general world sees you. That's sometimes more telling than the day in and day out one.
Thank you for that. And you've definitely left more than a couple pennies with me. Thank you, Mitch. Okay, this bonus episode from Mitch, Generational Wisdom of Dad, is in the books. Big thanks to Mitch for sharing his story. I hope you enjoyed this episode and that it brought a little something positive to your day. Remember to subscribe, post up a positive review, and most of all, share these meaningful conversations to start a meaningful conversation of your own with someone that you care about. Thanks again for listening.